Peggy, did you go ahead and start the meeting without me?
I was just letting people in because it seemed like the friendly thing to do. I put a thing in there. My husband brought dinner in, and it is like flaming hot. Like I took a bite, and when I opened my mouth, flames shot out of my mouth. And so I have my camera off because my eyes are like dripping tears and my face is bright red.
Yes, well, this is recording, so go ahead and hide your video as long as you want to.
Thank you.
Pig, so I am not seeing the little notification when people are waiting to join, so I think you might need to make me the organizer or sort of send that control back over to me
Sure,
since you
will
started
do.
it.
I've been letting people in as we go, so
Or you can continue to do that.
I'm happy to do it, but I think that I could share that with you. I'm not seeing any options to do that, Julie. Sorry, working
No,
on
that's
it.
okay. Click on
I'll keep working on
participants.
it, okay? I
Click
just
on,
let somebody in that is strictly a phone number, so I'm not really sure what the story is there.
I think that's Christina's phone number, but
Oh, okay. Well, Christina was on previously.
so click on participants and you'll get the little sidebar that lists all the people, and then hover over my name and click on more.
Okay.
And you should be able to make organizer or host or
Okay,
presenter.
well, I popped in there on your more. Here we go, more. No, oh, make host. Here we go.
There you
There
go.
you go. You're now the host.
Thanks, Peggy.
Uh-huh.
Let's make sure screen sharing is working. It is. Okay, I'll stop sharing until everyone joins. Welcome all. Oh, hey, Jan, go ahead.
Just hi. You can hear me.
Yes, we can. And this is recording. I don't see Paula on yet, so we'll give another minute.
Paula was on. I let her in.
Oh, there she is. My apologies. Paula, how is your audio?
Where am I?
Is that Virginia Britson? You're right here.
Well, I can't see anybody but you.
Oh, okay. So up in your right-hand corner, if you move your mouse around, there's going to be a little thing that says view with a little box next to it. And click on where it says view with that little box.
I'm not seeing that. I was seeing things fine until I left, and then I came back, and now I can't find it. All right.
So move your mouse around in your upper right-hand corner. And it should look like a little Tetris box and have the word view. And you click on view, and then you can change to gallery view instead of speaker view, and you'll see everybody. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started because it's 4:02. It looks like there's nobody in the waiting room. Welcome all of you board members and people who are attending from the general community. It is your March meeting. Oh, great. And Brian is able to join tonight. I'm going to go ahead and screen share. Ask that you please keep yourself muted. So Virginia, I'm going to go ahead and mute you unless you want to do a public comment, and we will get to that in just a minute. If you do want to do a public comment, go ahead and type into the chat your name and your general subject matter you'd like to comment on. I'll also give an opportunity for anybody on the phone to do a comment as well. We'll give a little overview of the meeting, reiterate the agreements and culture that this board agreed to when they first convened, have the public comment, go over some logistics, voting to approve the minutes. One of our co-chairs, Jim, is going to talk about the updated timeline to go out for some more community engagement for the month of April. And then the board jointly will be presenting the second draft of the policy recommendations that they have put together. If we have time, we'll do some community updates at the end. Just reiterating the agreements of inclusivity and kindness and respect as we go through this process. All right, for public comment, I am going to go ahead and stop screen sharing so that I can see everyone and make sure to see the chat. So far, nobody has typed into the chat any need for public comment. Is there anyone who called in on the phone who wanted to make a public comment? Now would be the time to unmute yourself and go ahead and make your comment. I'm not seeing anybody. So speak now or forever hold your peace for public comment. All right, we will go ahead and get back to the meeting. We have to vote on the minutes from last month. Jan Napak made some grammatical changes that were a colon here, a period here. Make sure Catherine Biscoe's name is spelled correctly, but there were no substantive changes to the minutes that were sent out to you all last week. So is there a motion to approve your February minutes?
Peggy McGuire would like to make that motion.
Second.
Jan Napak seconds. Thank you. Paula, can you unmute yourself and let me know that your audio is fine? Or type into the chat that you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Julie, just fine.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paula.
We're good.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take roll. Please unmute yourself to say that you vote yay or nay on the minutes, and we will also take roll this way. Flip Anderson.
Yay and present.
Lennox cannot be here tonight and previously contacted me to let me know. Zan Ojro. Zan, I know I saw you here earlier. I can't hear you. Okay, we will circle back to Zan. Catherine. Carol.
Yes, and here.
Thank you. Bruce. I don't hear Bruce or see Bruce yet. Anita. Oh, I skipped Brian. Apologies. Circling back to Brian Cotter. Brian, are you here?
I'm here just for a short period and I approve the minutes.
Thank you so much. Anita, are you here? All right, moving on to Joel.
Hear and approve.
Thanks, Joel. George.
Here and approved.
Barbara.
Hear and approve.
Alita.
Hear and approve.
I'm seeing Zan typing into the chat that Zan is here and approves. So Paula, please mark down Zan's vote and her attendance. Nikki.
Hear and approve.
Christina. Christina, are you here? All right, moving on. Charles cannot be here tonight due to a work conflict. He has an excused absence. Peggy.
Hear and approve.
Jim.
Hear and approve.
Andrea.
Hear and approve.
Jan.
Here, approve.
Reese.
Here and approved.
Linda. Linda, are you here tonight? Okay, and the last person, Catherine, are you here? Have you joined us? All right, so we do have an update on board membership. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing so you all can see each other, and hand the floor over to Nikki Hobbs.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that I will be coming off of the board starting in April. Is Julie, you might have to help me. Is our new member here?
Yes, I think she is. And just to clarify, Nikki will still be a board member at the April meeting. And then after the April meeting, we'll be stepping down. And in May, we will have a new board member, Janie Tebow. Janie, I saw you join the meeting. Are you able to share your video and introduce yourself?
My video doesn't appear. Oh, there I am.
There you are. Hi, Janie. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Janie Tebow, I am so pleased to be a part of this wonderful group. I serve as second vice president to NAACP, and I also have been serving as on the board of commissioners for the Lynn Mitten Housing Authority for a couple years now. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
I'd like to reiterate the thanks to Nikki. She's put in a whole year of work and research, and will be continuing for the next 2 meetings to finish out her stint as a board member. And you've done just such great work, Nikki. Do you want to share with the board what you'll be moving on to?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. It's very kind. Yes, I will be going off to graduate school in the fall to get my master's of public health. I'm still a little bit up in the air, waiting to hear from a scholarship still, but I will either be going to Cardiff University in the United Kingdom or Freiburg University in Germany. And it's been really terrific working with all of you. I have really learned so much that I'm definitely going to take with me to my master's program. And I just want to thank you for all the tremendous work and mentorship that you've all offered. And I'm really excited to have Janie be our new board member. So welcome.
Thanks, Nikki, and welcome to Janie. She will join you as a board member at your May meeting, and I will meet with her separately at least once, if not twice, to catch her up on all the research and data you've collected so that she can hit the ground running as much as possible. So great news on that front. I see that we now have Bruce Butler with us and Catherine Biscoe with us. So Paula, if you can please mark Bruce down and Catherine as both attending. Bruce, you were at last month's meeting. Can you please cast your vote to approve last month's minutes?
So cast.
Thank you. And Catherine, you as
Aye.
well.
Yeah, also approved.
Okay, thanks to you both. I'm going to go ahead and screen share just so I remember what we are doing here. All right, so as I shared with the board, there is an update about the community engagement that's going to be happening for the next month in April. And I'm going to pass it over to Jim to share that update and that timeline and the reason for it.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome especially to Janie and thank you, Nikki. So we're nearing this a milestone in our work. When we talked about the schedule for our work over the recent months, we were targeting this meeting as completion of our first round of priority recommendations to the city and the county. But as we've neared the end of that, we're also getting requests for creating other opportunities for public review. And I've been involved in just a ton of public processes over the years. You know, I can't, uncountable. And one of the things that I can say is pretty safe is that even when there's many opportunities for public involvement during the course of a process, it's also true that near the end, when things are coming to some finer point of completion, is when more people really want to pay attention, because it's not a process anymore, it's a product, and people start paying attention to that product and what we put out as our recommendations. So we've gotten some, now that we have something that's close to a finished product, we've decided that there should be another opportunity for people to participate and comment, because we know some of the things that we're coming up with are going to draw attention, and we know some of the things that we're coming up with are probably going to have broad support. It's going to be all over the map, but we want to have an opportunity for the public to have their say about it now that we have something more solid for them to look at. It's also true that the city council and the county commissioners in their own schedule had scheduled a review of our recommendations for later in May. So that juxtaposition of our public or elected officials not really looking at all this until later in May, combined with requests for public review, we thought we would basically take another month before we finish our work. And during this next month, we will, Julie can get more specific about dates, but basically we're going to have a 3-step process. One is we're going to put our draft document out for review through SurveyMonkey. And second, we're going to provide a public forum for people to comment and make their suggestions how to improve what we've done, and to really focus that meeting on listening and on dialogue. And then the third step will be that we'll take all that information and we'll have our regular meeting in late April, at which we finish up our recommendations. One other thing that's going to happen very soon is that we're going to take the results of this meeting and put it into a more complete document that really highlights our policy recommendations and then provides additional information as background, so that when it finally comes time for us to vote, we'll have a shorter document actually than what we're looking at today, because we will be looking at those policy recommendations by themselves, and it'll make it a little simpler for us to review as well as for the public to look at. So that all of that suggests something for today's meeting. Excuse me, because we're not going to try to finish this work at this meeting. I think my suggestion is that we not get caught up in wordsmithing the document in front of us, because that document's going to change some more before we're done. I think what we really want to focus on today is what is the intent of each of our major recommendations. Are we stating our recommendations clearly? Are we is it saying what we want it to say in terms of the policy recommendations? Is there anything that we want to adjust before we put this in final form? So we're really focusing on the intent of each of these policy recommendations rather than getting the words exactly right. And once we have that intent clear, then it should make the final review a little bit easier too. Any questions about that, about the process we're going to go through over the next few weeks, as well as today's meeting?
Jim, just real quick, I do want to concur. It's good. I spoke with our mayor today, and he strongly suggested that if we're going to be putting out recommendations and policy, we still need to capture at some point, background and justification for each one, and hopefully we'll be doing that today. And also, it'd be good to get a back of the envelope budget picture of what our proposals are. Entail.
Makes sense.
Well, and Jim, if
Okay.
I can just add to that, as far as, what does this mean for you as board members? It will mean attending a public forum. So that'll likely be a 2-hour forum. The date that appears to work the best for the city and the county is Tuesday, April 13th from 4 to 6 p.m. Just to give you a heads up, I just got that email from our city and county public information officers. Tuesday, April 13th from 4 to 6 p.m. With really the goal of that being public feedback and discussion and dialogue, and not for the board to present. And you will have one more work group meeting, and it will be in the week of April 19th through the 22nd to look at all of the public feedback on this final draft of your recommendations, to make any tweaks before your April meeting. So that, as far as your time commitment in April, that's what we're talking about realistically. Okay, I'll go ahead and keep going with the meeting. Thank you for clarifying all that, Jim. I included this for an overview of the timeline for visual learners like myself, who want to see sort of where this is visually with the work that you are doing. And again, reiterating that taking this month to do more public engagement on your final draft of recommendations is not going to affect how soon the city and county elected officials are going to meet to review them, to start the process of reviewing them on May 20th. Including, again, the ultimate purpose that your advisory board has in advising the city and the county. The priority topic areas and where they started out. How you arrived at your 4 priority topic areas with data and research and gaps analysis and community engagement this past fall. How you engage the community to arrive at these different topic areas. And now let's look at your second draft of the first 4 priority topic areas. I want to be sure to say in the beginning that your first 15 recommendations cover topics 1 through 4 on this systemic vision of a housing and services spectrum. But your last 3 recommendations on 16, 17, and 18 are about how to implement all of your policy recommendations. And so keep that in mind as you are sharing and presenting your different policy recommendations, that at the end, 16, 17, and 18 are the organizational capacity to do all this work and implement it, recommendations about new funding sources, and recommendations about legislative advocacy. So I wanted to include that visual here for you all. Just included how your recommendations are grounded in data and prioritizing by vulnerability, and taking a systems level approach and incorporating public feedback that you received in November and December. So with that, we'll get it kicked off with topic 1. And Peggy, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So one of the things that we have dealt with over and over in the collection of data is that there are so many different data systems. Everybody is putting into different data systems, and we're all struggling to figure out how we can find a way to get an economy of scale and make sure that we're not doing duplicative data entry. So that is really one of the most important pieces of this process, that we want to track the data, but we want to not create burdensome processes for partners. And we want to find ways that we can ensure that we are sharing data systems. So the other piece of all this is that as we're sharing data systems, it's interesting and important to know what are the best outcomes? So as we put information in and we track clients longitudinally across processes, what are the best outcomes and what are the most successful outcomes that clients can have? And that is a very important piece of this process.
Thanks, Peggy.
Mhm.
Anita, are you here? Okay, I did not see Anita join, so I'll just go ahead and share her slides here. And this is the recommendation to the city and the county to adopt the hub model of care coordination as a framework for doing business that coordinates existing partners. And I went ahead and added in here this first bullet point after some feedback from the community about confusion that's happening about what the hub model is. The hub model of care coordination brings together different providers and partners at routine meetings to address the complex needs of individuals. And the model is similar to what has been done in the past in our community with the adult services team or with the homeless and vulnerable patients work group that's convened by Samaritan, where different providers and partners attend a joint meeting. And it can be virtual or it can be hosted in person to really work on the complex cases of individuals with different needs from different systems. So this group also included the recommendation to have you could call it a coordinator or an agency navigator, but a staff person to coordinate the hub model with some recommendations about what that staff person could be and the work that staff person could do. And that implementation could be done immediately with an existing staff person until someone can be budgeted for that role. And then some more explanation about the hub and the different providers and partners to include at the table, depending on the client who is being helped. A lot of this is nitty gritty, but really the intention of the hub is articulated on this slide about bringing together different providers and partners at routine meetings to address the complex needs of individuals. Okay. Supporting co-locating of service providers. Lennox can't be here tonight, so I'll go ahead and present their slide. And this is about helping from a client perspective in the same way that the Daytime Drop-In Center has space for someone from Samaritan's Homeless Resource Team or for a county health navigator to meet with clients on site. Having support for co-location of service providers from different organizations with some shared space. It doesn't mean relocation of providers, but just some shared space to help from the client perspective. All right, George, I'll pass it over to you.
Sure, thank you. So as you see the 4 goals that we had, the 4 things that we just went over, the last thing that we have there is allocate state and local resources to programs that support these 4 goals. So if you actually want to implement these things, and it's going to take policy decisions, it's going to take direction from elected officials to do it. One of the ways that also helps move it along is to allocate resources that you believe are best going to help you achieve those goals, and those goals are listed there. And then the last is when we talk about the hub model and bringing the hub model together, Julie was talking about a navigator. This is the piece that talks to the need for not only a full-time navigator in that case, but the addition of case managers and professional trained case managers with some specific background in how to be able to deal with people, to deal with the situations that they're going to find themselves in. And it's recommending that we work with our other partners in the community, community health, Samaritan Health Services, and the city and the county, and other providers to get together to say, how can we go about increasing the number of professional case managers that we have out there and make it work overall.
Thanks, George. The last one from this first group, Barb, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Julie. The other part of this recommendation is to actually institute a crisis response team. We recommend that a non-police intervention for crisis situations due to homelessness and behavioral health issues, as long as a person who's in crisis isn't harming themselves or others or damaging property, it's not against the law to be in crisis. And sometimes just the presence of a uniformed officer can, by their mere presence, escalate a crisis behavior. So what the H.O.P.E board is recommending is to pursue the feasibility and implementation of a crisis response team using our data that we've collected, as well as the community feedback that we've received, to help support and implement a crisis response team that redirects calls from law enforcement and provides those members of that response team, as well as our partners in law enforcement, to be ready to take part if it's necessary.
Thanks, Barbara.
Oh,
sorry.
I was just going to read that last part, that we do recognize that there are ongoing efforts with the Criminal Justice Systems Improvement Project and the Willamette Criminal Justice Council, and we have people on the H.O.P.E board that are taking part in that as well.
Okay, one thing just to note, Anita Earl has joined the meeting. Paula, can you please note her down as attending? And it sounds like Peggy is going to have to sign off. So Peggy, thanks for joining tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that anyone on the H.O.P.E board can give feedback to this group about any other changes that need to be made at this stage, and really focusing on intent and overall policy, because there will be an opportunity for the public to chime in on this as well, and the group to go back and wordsmith it in April. Jan, can you unmute yourself, please?
Just making sure that we have a way to estimate what our needs are.
What do you mean, Jan?
So if we say we need more, do we have a starting number? Do we have any idea what more means?
Are you talking about increasing case managers
Sure.
to
If you
support
go
people?
back to the George Grosh slide, yeah, number 6, yeah.
I don't know that we do know how many more case managers are needed. Is there a board member who can answer that question?
I was going to say we need to define that. It would be better if we could, as opposed to making it.
I think that we should be able to provide ranges, and as you say, ballpark, but we're not going to be able to provide specifics. And some of this is going to come up,
Sure.
Against needing to put together specific proposals to fund particular components. And I think that in terms of where we should be as specific as we can is probably with respect to the capacity that's needed just to, for the last items that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation, to provide additional capacity to get there.
Right, and who would be responsible for defining that would be also, is that?
Well, let's talk about it in our executive committee, because I think that's probably the best place to do that.
Thank you.
I saw Jim put a hand up, and then George, and then Andrea.
I changed my mind. I put my
Okay.
hand down.
Okay.
Later on.
George, and then Andrea.
I think I would just add to what Jan and Zan were, or to what Zan was saying. We're an advisory group, and when you're asking us for specifics, this group isn't in a position to give you how many case managers we need or how many other things. But there are plenty of people around this table and here that are capable of doing that. So when you talk about case managers, I'm going to say this recommendation is going to go to elected officials. Elected officials say, yeah, we're going to adopt these things. And if additional case management is part of that, then I would suspect that the county and the health department and the service providers in the community would get together and then start to say, what's the tangible amount that's going to happen. But and the same applies to money. I mean, we can't put a money estimate on any of this because it's not our role and it's not what we do. But once we get to the point where, once the recommendations get to the point where they're looking at being implemented, that's when people come up with a number for that's there.
Understood, George. I'm in a hard spot though, because when I ask for money, I need to tell them
How much?
and why, and who recommended it, and what the criteria is.
Right. Well, I mean, because there are so many different players in here, I think, Jan, a way to look at that from, if I were sitting in your shoes, I mean, I'd be looking at it and saying, of this list, what are the things on these lists and on these parties that are going to fall onto the city plate? Because not everything that's here is going to be a responsibility of the city. It will be other organizations and other groups that will be able to take that up.
Yeah, I need to know. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Andrea.
I mean, if you wanted to just make sure that the case management development is appropriate, you could just say something like appropriate caseloads. Because, you know, there's always the idea of hiring case managers and then giving them a caseload of 100 people, which is no good. So.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we're data driven. So there you go.
All right. Well, thanks all. Let's move on to your second topic. Let me go ahead and share. And Zan, why don't you go ahead and kick this off?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. I don't know what happened before. In our group, we were tasked with discussing an emergency sheltering system. We focused both on location and what that system should comprise. We had a lot of very good discussions. What we need here in Benton County, an emergency sheltering system, not just a place, that provides emergency shelter for all populations that we've identified as vulnerable, with on-site resources at each of those shelter locations that can help people get out of homelessness. So in that sense, we also need a resource center with representation from providers from multiple agencies. So this is echoing that last recommendation number 4, actually, that you've already heard about co-location of resource providers. And it shows up here in a slightly different way. Then this, in terms of an emergency sheltering system, our goal is to transition people out of homelessness. So in order to do that, people need to have a place that is open 24/7, 365 days of the year, where they have a guaranteed bed that's theirs while they're there and working with a case manager. And so that's kind of a minimum basic of that emergency shelter. We would also be very helpful to have co-located resource providers that can work with these individuals to help them transition out of homelessness. This kind of a combined system has been referred to at the state level as a navigation center. And there's legislation pending right now before the state legislature listed here that refers to navigation center capacity. And there have been a handful of cities that were awarded funds under a budget reconciliation measure just this last week to address their needs for this kind of facility. So creating a navigation center that is in that full sense, it has a place for emergency shelter for each of the different populations we've identified, and I'll circle back to that in a couple of slides, and has that sort of a resource center component is a really tall order because it takes more land. Ideally, it needs to be in a central place. It needs to be on transportation lines and requires the coordination of several different service providers in order to provide the service. And it's not without its challenges. Some of those are the potential for concentration of population of people living in poverty kind of off to the side, and that's kind of ghettoization. That's an equity issue. Another is the fact that there's a need for separation of some of these populations, a safety concern. So this is not we recognize that if we were to go for a full-blown navigation center, we would have some challenges to resolve, serious challenges. So there needs to be clear leadership on this topic. And part of what would be involved if we move in this direction for kind of our long-term goal is that we would need support from the city and the county to probably work with some contractor to help us find a place to make this happen. So it's a real issue of political will. The other, yep, that's it for that. So basically what we're talking about at this point is that we need to have a phased approach. In the near term, it's clear that we need to have men's and women's shelters that are open 24/7 all year round with supportive services that can meet on site with folks to help transition them out of homelessness, as well as the case management on a daily basis to support people in this journey. The other need is for several partners that are listed here, including IHN, Samaritan, service providers, city and county, to facilitate a mobile support unit. And that mobile service delivery would be able to support those resource needs in a wraparound way for the micro shelters, potentially for RV, trailer, car camping, managed tent camping locations, if those are dispersed as the city council has described possibly being an outcome. And also to provide service around Benton County outside of the Corvallis area. And I saw there was a question in the chat about Crisis Respite Center. Crisis Resource Center is definitely a different thing. And I don't like the language. I have to be clear about this. Crisis Respite Center that we've been talking about in the criminal justice systems work is a mental health, behavioral health crisis respite location where people can go to stabilize and be evaluated. That is not the hospital and not the jail. They can be there anywhere from 24 hours up to 30 days. And that is focused on kind of stabilization from mental health crisis. What we're talking about here in terms of resource center is much more of a co-location of several different providers that help people get out of homelessness to make that transition. So yeah, we need to clarify our language a bit, and thank you for that question. So in an earlier slide, we mentioned the populations that need support. And the populations that we are talking about are that we can house men in a congregate shelter, as is happening in the men's cold weather shelter now, or women in a congregate shelter setting, as in the room at the inn right now, especially after the COVID pandemic starts to wind down. But we're going to need some non-congregate shelter even after COVID for folks that can't be in those kinds of dormitory settings. So for anyone that is non-binary or trans, for couples, for people who can't be in these kinds of settings because of medical fragility or behavioral health disorders, people with pets, and for family units. We know that there are parents and children, even adult parents with adult children that are homeless, and they need some other kind of setting in order to be able to remain together. So some of the options might be single unit options like motel room style units, or possibly micro shelters. But we also know that our current micro shelter model can't accommodate more than one person very easily right now. So if that were the case, we would need to come up with another micro shelter model that would be able to handle a double bed or a bunk bed.
Thank you, Zan. I think those were all of your slides. Am I right?
Yep.
Okay. Christina, are you able to see the screen, or did you call in? I am not hearing you, Christina. All right. Well, Zan, would you like to continue for the next couple slides? Do you want me to articulate them?
I'd be happy to go on if you like.
Okay. Yeah, it's just the components of this emergency sheltering system.
So some of these we've already touched upon. Any emergency shelter for men, women, or for the non-congregate component of the population needs to be available year-round, 24/7. It should be low barrier in order to be able to get individuals off the street. One of my favorite lines is "no roof, no recovery." It's pretty difficult to get out of substance use if you don't have a roof over your head. We would like to make sure that at these places there's an option for people to provide some sweat equity, to do some work to help sustain the place as they are getting back on their feet. We know that there are several necessary components. Whatever shelter we provide needs to be accessible on foot, by bicycle safely, provide public transportation, and we have to address safety concerns for all of the populations that might be there, and safety concerns in terms of security, lighting, meeting fire code, emergency access for EMT fire service. All of those factors need to be considered. We also recognize that any of these facilities, we have to have showers, dining areas, drinking water, and other kinds of services like laundry and lockers for those that are in a dormitory style congregate shelter, and mail service. Each of these locations also, as we mentioned before, needs to have a suite of offices or small conference rooms where they can meet with clients, and service providers can help work with these folks to transition out of homelessness. In this vision, time in an emergency shelter would be temporary, and time limits would be in place based on availability of the next transitional option in the community, and duration of stay would be very much client-based and client-centered, depending on their ability to make progress. But emergency shelter is not a solution at all. It's a step along the journey. We foresee that any kind of emergency shelter is likely to need an overflow area for people that show up in a car or an RV, and that those would be managed tent or RV camping areas, and it would be time limited. That is not the preferred option. But we recognize that we probably would need to have that as an option, just for overflow. The next component is just the daytime capacity, that folks have to be able to be at this shelter during the day as well as at night, in order to be able to do the work to transition. So we've covered some of the other elements about hygiene facilities and lockers, so we won't go into that.
Okay, I think that was the end of Christina's portion. Thank you, Zan. She's texting saying that she can hear, but is not able to unmute herself. She called in on the phone. So Christina, I'm really sorry about that. But I'm glad that you are here so that you are hearing everything that's going on. Brian, are you still part of the meeting? Brian has a family emergency, so he was going to have to step off at some point.
Do we ask questions of the emergency shelter now, or do we wait?
Give it just a few more slides, Jan, but thank you. I'll go ahead and just share that this group, looking at the data and the gaps in our system, that is recommending a managed tent camping area as part of the emergency sheltering system. And that it is supervised and supported with boundaries, amenities, and that it's limited based on staffing capacity to provide case management to people and help them transition. This group included a definition of managed camping here at the bottom for those who are unfamiliar with it. But the basic gist is that an organization has site control and also provides case management and access to hygiene, water, trash, and resources. This group noted that the part of the reason for this recommendation is community sentiment about unmanaged camping and lots of concerns about fire and community safety and individual safety. and to mitigate those community concerns, the need for a managed emergency camping area is being recommended. And also just noting that there are individuals who might not be able to engage to transition out of homelessness for a variety of reasons, and the need for additional pretrial justice services for people who pose a community safety issue, and also a need for improved crisis response for individuals in behavioral health crisis. And let's see, Flip, is this your slide?
Hey, yeah. So this, I'll just read it. A managed RV trailer and car camping area is needed. RV sites must have gray and black water dump hookups for appropriate hygiene. The definition, a specific designated area where camping in vehicles is under the direct control of an organization. The organization designates vehicle placement with consideration for emergency service accessibility. Vehicle campers have access to hygiene, water, trash, and resources. Mobile service delivery capacity can make it possible to support distributed sites at multiple smaller locations throughout the county.
Thank you, Flip. And Alita, I think you are doing the next two slides.
Yes, thank you. I'm kind of excited that I got to do these two because over the years I've been watching the numbers, and this is kind of about initial estimates for this emergency sheltering. Of course, these are estimates, and I think, you know, we'd love to see that this would be smaller, but right now it's what it is from the data that we've collected and kind of counting noses as we've experienced them. For women, we feel that there will probably be a need for 40 congregate beds. And that's, if you can read that, it's based on the data from the women's shelter. Right now there's 20 to 25 beds and they're doing an awesome job. And their model has been 365 days a year at the location at the church, but this could change. They may really want their church back for the youth that have been displaced. The numbers for the men, 60. We've had in the past a place for 50 beds. With COVID, of course, that had to change and it decreased to 15, but the capacity needs to be at least 60. And that's definitely something that I think is doable. Where it happens, we've had it happen in other places around the community. Right now, I think there's a little concern about the fact that it's in a flood zone. However, it's been functioning quite well for the last few years. In the non-congregate units, this is pretty exciting. We are actually seeing that safe spaces are being happening, individual units with the micro shelters, and also with what Corvallis Housing First has done to expand the units that they have for transitional housing. At right now, the newest addition is, of course, a 24-unit motel. And at the moment, it'll be for COVID mostly, but after a while, it can transition to housing for folks to move along on the scale of housing capacity. Also, there is on the next slide about RV trailers and camping. That's always been something that's been troublesome to me. I know that people are coming to the drop-in center and they're living in their cars, or they're trying to find a place. They've got this RV, where can I put it? So at least making this awareness happen and know that this is a transitional step for many people. I think this is awesome. And we're thinking, you know, it's kind of large. We may need as many as, well, right now at Pioneer Park, there's 30 people that applied, 30 applicants, which probably represented 60 folks. And then at the fairgrounds, that's been pretty full all year long. So at least 40 spaces are needed. Managed camping, definitely, we can count a lot of noses. We see probably, I don't know, 600 at least unduplicated folks from the beginning of our fiscal year to the end at the drop-in center, and a lot of them are camping somewhere. So we would love to have it be managed, as was spoken about earlier. So somewhere between 80 and 120 people are camping right now near the hygiene center. And if we could distribute some managed camping in a variety of spots, I think this would really help with security for the people who camp, as well as the people who are worried about unmanaged camping. Thank you.
Thanks, Alita. So this is now the time for feedback on this emergency sheltering system recommendation. Just to kind of target your feedback. I think what Jim said in the beginning about the intention of this recommendation and not about the details or the wordsmithing. So I've just given a little overview here to kind of summarize that there are 5 components needed as part of our sheltering system. All need to have hygiene facilities 24/7, 365, case management with men's, women's, non-congregate, managed tent camping, and managed car and RV trailer camping. 2 additional components for hygiene and basic needs for anyone, including people who aren't staying in shelter, that warming and cooling area and hygiene access. And that accessibility, safety, and resource access is critical for all these components. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing for a minute here. I saw Jim's hand up first. Go ahead, and then Joel.
So one of the earlier slides mentioned the challenges involved in these recommendations. You know, on the list was identifying one or more sites, concentration of populations living in poverty, and the need for separation of some populations for safety. I know earlier drafts of this group's work were exploring the possibility of a village approach, and that seems to have gone away, or those words aren't used anymore anyway. And I appreciate that these challenges, the statement of challenges, addresses something that concerns me significantly, which is either on purpose or inadvertently creating concentrations of homeless people, especially if we're pushing them to the edges of town. I don't think segregating homeless people is appropriate. And I don't think it's practical or healthy for that population to all kind of be put in one place. I would feel more comfortable if the intent here is not to sell us on, you know, a single location kind of approach anymore, but to describe something else. I would feel more comfortable if it said, we're going to need more than one site to do these things, because we don't want to create inappropriate concentrations of poverty. We don't want to create unmanageable impacts on a single neighborhood. And we recognize that there needs to be a variety of options in order for people to be sheltered in a safe way. So I think that could be clearer. And something else, and then I'll stop, that kind of reinforces my concern is the concept of the resource center. The resource center is described as something that should be associated with a shelter. I think we know that in the, certainly in the short term, but maybe in the forever term as well, we're not going to be sheltering all homeless people. As a matter of fact, I hope we have a robust system of getting people out of shelters and into permanent housing, you know, over time. So if a resource center is not going to just serve people in shelters, but is going to serve people who are unsheltered, like a lot of the people that Alita sees all the time now, then we're talking about, and if we're associating a resource center with shelter, then we're talking again about a concentration of human beings at one location. where we're having to identify a site where not only are we sheltering people, but we're going to serve everyone else in or out of shelters at the resource center. And it's all going to be, you know, in a concentrated location. So that all makes me pretty uncomfortable. And I know that the group is still working on that, or will have another opportunity to work on this. So I would certainly appreciate some clarity on what we're asking the city and the county to acknowledge. Especially, I'd feel more comfortable if it said, we're going to need more than one site to do this. And we're going to have to figure out how to serve people, not just in one location, but in a dispersed way.
Thanks, Jim. I think Joel had his hand up next, and then Jan.
Yeah, I think I might be looking for a little clarification. I know in a couple of slides, I'm going to be talking about transitional options to include managed camping as something that, you know, if it's implemented, because it doesn't have the community support. And yet there's a couple of slides in here that talk about managed camping must be a part of these. So is that something that we could clarify? I guess I'm a little confused on where we are.
I think it was more emergency managed camping versus a transitional managed camping where someone stays for an extended period of time. And so the need for a managed camping as part of an emergency sheltering system to get people out of unmanaged camping, but that it is time limited and as a separate thing from transitional living options where someone is going to stay for quite some time. I think that's the difference there.
So would the proposal then with this section be that essentially everybody that's currently camping, say in our parks, we would find a managed camp for them to be at?
Is there someone from this topic group who wants to respond? Zan or Alita? Who else was in this group?
So I guess I could tell you how I feel about it. I believe that we have to have reality set in, as you well know, how many people are out there. We know that just posting people to move to another unmanaged place isn't working well for us. It doesn't end homelessness, but having a place where people can be and have some services and also have case management sounds like a more realistic way to end homelessness. And whether that means that there's more than one managed camp in the community and it actually pulls in more of the 120 people that, at least people that we know are out there, I guess I would say that that makes sense to me.
I guess I'm, what sort of confused me a little bit is the topic 3 group that I've been on that, like I said, in a few slides, I'm going to be reading those recommendations, refers back to that data that we received from the community surveys and community feedback that managed camping is not widely supported either by the community at large or by clients. So that was the recommendation of, if a decision is made to allow managed camping, that here are some parameters, but this seems to be kind of contradicting that.
Well, I think that the surveys showed us that their preference would of course be a micro shelter. So if we could build 120 of those, we could probably eliminate a lot of campers that are unmanaged.
You know, if I could add something, I would just say, I don't think it's realistic to, we said this is going to be a difficult conversation, and it is difficult, it's hard. And certainly there are going to be things that the community doesn't like, but there's a lot of things that happen in the world that I don't like either. And I still find a way to get with it. But what Alita's saying is really true. It's denying reality to say, if we don't have a managed camping site, that we're going to be able to in any way deal with the issues that people are concerned about rough camping. And that's the environmental and the neighborhood problems that come from people camping up in other places. And then to think is, are we saying it's acceptable for somebody to spend their life living in a tent? No, that's not necessarily something that I consider to be okay, but that's a step in a system that we're trying to put together to lead people to have a permanent place to live. And it's a tool that you need in the toolbox in order to make it happen. And yeah, it may be difficult to do, but it's important to do it if we really want to make an impact.
Jan, and then it looks like Jim has his hand up again.
Okay, I'll try to make this quick. I know that Martin versus Boise might play into managed camping because if we don't want unmanaged camping, we have to have a place for them to go. So right now, that's kind of a key issue. And so it's part of the continuum. The next thing is that one of the things that Jim Moorfield was talking about, I call it ghettoization. And it truly is when you're concentrating a class of people in certain areas, that's ghettoization. What I'd like to see is we have COI, we have other places, hopefully, that will be opening up elsewhere around the city. But if we could do a virtual resource center so that every place, just like they have computers linked at Good Sam, the computers are linked at the library. Access to the hub from any node should be available. And if we want one-on-one services, that's a different thing. The next thing is
Jan, I just want to clarify that you said the hub, but the hub model of care coordination is very different than what you're referencing right now. So you're talking about a variety of service providers at a resource center, and being able to access those providers via a computer at different sheltering locations.
Yeah, we can go online and we can, chat. That happens all the time now. The next thing is that I'm not real clear on this. I know I talked to Peggy about this earlier, but are we using emergency shelter in the generic term, not in the HUD terminology, which is a legal definition? And that's it. Peggy's not here.
I don't know the answer to your question, Jan. I'm sorry. Okay. Jim.
Just one clarification, the exchange that followed after Joel's question. Numbers were thrown out, 120 campers and that kind of thing. And that number of 120 campers shows up in our data. But presumably that number would be significantly different if we actually had a men's shelter, in a women's shelter capable of handling more of a capacity than the 15 that the men's shelter handles now. So when we get to the pandemic, through the pandemic, I'm sorry, and if we had a shelter that was, a 24/7 shelter of the size we had, in the recent past, if not a little bigger, then in theory, that 120 campers would be quite a bit less. So that doesn't change the question that Joel had or the response that others had to it. But I'm not comfortable throwing around numbers like, well, we need to have, managed camping for 120 when our own data tells us we wouldn't need something that big if we actually had an adequate shelter system.
And one thing this group did add in, Jim, on that slide is that these are just initial estimates, but that they probably would change with shelter capacity. So that will need to be assessed as time goes on. Are there other board members who want to give feedback to this group? I know this group has done a lot of work in the last week to really articulate the different components and that they do not need to be located in a campus-like setting because of that marginalization issue. Other feedback for them? Andrea? No? Okay. Okay, well then I'll go ahead and share the next groups. Okay. Oh, sorry, this is the resource center concept.
I'm sorry, Julie, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
I think one of the things, and I just want to, this is another intent question for this group. At the very end of all the slides, it was talking about a scenario where if a number of things were in place, camping outside of this managed system would be treated as something illegal. I believe that's what it said. Is that accurate?
I think, can we assume that that is one of the goals, is to not have camping and not to allow it on public property, public places, right?
I think Jan, that's exactly why I was asking the question, because that's a fairly, significant statement. And, in my mind, it is the argument for managed camping, because then we have a stronger case for not allowing camping all over the place. And if we're going to say that, I think we should really, it is spelled out there, but I think it was kind of de-emphasized a little bit. And and that's a fairly powerful statement to make. So
I think whoever said it earlier, camping in tents is not a good thing, no matter how you slice it, for long term.
Okay, this is Alita. I would like to make a statement that I feel that the way the document has been written, if we didn't even say that threat, it would still be a strong document. And as you, Jan, brought up, the legality of what happens in Idaho could happen without having places to put people and posting them.
Right.
That our document as a recommendation is strong enough that those statements that remind folks about posting and illegalities doesn't make the document stronger, and could be just not mentioned, although we know it's true. That's why we do need more places to move people along the continuum of housing.
Yeah, and that ties into the definition of emergency, and there's a lot to chew on there.
Jim, I'm taking note of this though, because I think you're tethering this to the intent. The intent of having emergency managed camping is really to stop unmanaged camping. And all of the community concerns around the unmanaged camping that this group articulated and that the public feedback indicated, as far as, fire, community safety, litter, noise, all of that. So I'm making a note of that to
I was
share with the group.
If I may be so bold as to stick my neck way out, unmanaged camping is a lose-lose as far as the community is concerned, is probably as far as participants are concerned.
And I think I would disagree with Alita. Although I understood your point, Alita, that we don't even have to say anything about our position on illegal camping, but I think the community expects us to say something about that. And I think it's a significant statement to say we want to be able to see a path towards ending it, because we are providing adequate alternatives. In the absence of providing adequate alternatives, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. There's legal issues, there's moral issues, and so on. But if the intent, once again, is to say we want to make it unnecessary, we want to provide a range of alternatives that allows people to be safe, then yes, that also provides a path to addressing something that I think a lot of people in the community are very troubled by, and including me. And so that's why I said if that's what we're saying, then we should come out and say it. If you don't want to, if this group doesn't want to say it that clearly, then that's another matter. But
You want to wait to hear from the community? in April.
Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, this issue is really hard for me too, because I don't think that tents are good places for human beings to be, especially in the middle of an Oregon winter, and even in the summertime, because there's lots of problems. But I almost wonder if that's one of the issues that we pose to, the next month. And again, I'm torn, because I know that as a service provider, I mean, human beings need a place to be, but at the same time, I don't know what the community is going to say about it, but that could be something that we investigate further.
You won't have to pose the question to get write-in responses with the answer. Let me tell you. I kid. Okay, let me go ahead and go forward here. The one slide that I forgot to share was the resource center, and really the recommendation this group was giving that the city and the county should facilitate this collaboration between providers to create this resource center, and some details about having office space for providers from different organizations. And this is also coming out of a gaps analysis from your community need, that CSC is looking for office space. The COG might be looking for office space. United Way might be, and then the client feedback about having to go to multiple different locations to enroll in all these separate different programs. Okay, I think I am passing it over to Joel.
So for transitional options, we're prioritizing based on public feedback for cost-effective allocations, and this is part of the data-driven approach that we're supposed to be following, as well as the public feedback we're supposed to be soliciting. Based on that information, in descending order in terms of community support, which includes clients, micro shelters receive the most support, followed by emergency shelter, RV and car camping, and last is tent camping. And the tent camping, as you can read there, is the least supported as a transitional option by the public to include clients. As we've talked about before, there's concerns of fire, individual safety for the people that are camping, safety of the community at large, litter, noise, visibility. If this is an option that is implemented, because the discussion on our group was that although this is not supported, a decision may be made to proceed with managed camping anyway. But if that is implemented, we came up with some parameters to keep it as a transitional option, such as time limits for individual campers, with evaluation of that person's progress on a case-by-case basis. So not necessarily setting a hard, fast deadline, but ensuring that it's not a permanent solution, that this person has to be progressing. Some case management along with that. We also recognize that there are some folks who aren't going to engage in this process to transition out of homelessness, which is part of a need for some crisis response and respite for those who aren't able to engage to do mental health conditions. And then also for those who pose a danger to the safety of the community for some criminal justice systems improvement, such as jail capacity to address those behavior issues.
Thanks, Joel. Passing it over to Nikki.
Okay, so we also are recommending that we establish referral pathways going into transitional and permanent supportive housing for serious criminal offenders. This includes sex offenders, but also other felony convictions. And we know that we have a need for this, but we don't have complete data on this. So it's something that we would definitely need to investigate further before issuing any further recommendation on this.
Thanks, Nikki. Catherine, passing it over to you. And Catherine, I saw that you just raised your hand or put something in the chat, and I'm sorry I didn't see it before.
It's okay. I couldn't quite get to my chat hand raising in time. if I can just step back to the previous conversation, just enough to say that in the last slide, we were talking a lot about relying on, so this communication model where we have service providers, kind of networking together with one another. I'll avoid the hub model conversation at this point, but I don't know that we've defined it, and it's probably implied, but somewhere is there a way that our service providers are really stretched already? They're doing a lot of things already, and a lot of it is being done because of the assistance with volunteers. Is there some way that we can acknowledge as a board that additional funding in that capacity to support that networking and that communication in and amongst might have some appropriateness? And it was just a topic of discussion. And then something else that Zan had mentioned as part of her presentation was that conversation of sweat equity. And I know that's bounced in and around a couple times, but making sure that we identify that out of all of this transitional process and emergency process, I should say, to transitional to hopefully permanent, we're hoping to establish some sort of buy-in from the communities that we are serving also, because that gives a value to the individuals participating, and it helps support the system as well. So I just wondered if there was language that we wanted to improve on those two topics, and I'm sorry that it merged into this transitional work group set of slides.
That's okay, Catherine. I'm making a note of it to share with the group working on those topics, but you can go ahead and present this recommendation from your group about communication notice and community involvement.
Okay, and just a quick question on that. I see that it is actually how I'm seeing it is 2 slides. Is that correct? Or are you just having me read the first one?
Yes, so there's the first one. It has 2 bullet points, and then the second slide has that third part of your recommendation.
Okay, very good. So the transitional housing group, as did all the work groups worked on, there's a tremendous amount of work that has taken place here. There's 21 H.O.P.E advisory board members that are bringing a lot of expertise, experience, a lot of their tools and knowledge to the table in these conversations. But have realized along the way, and certainly in the process, that improved communication and community involvement is only going to help come to better solutions. So one of our recommendations was specifically around that notion of better communication or improving communications. Routine monthly updates were part of that conversation. And we likened that to those of you familiar with Corvallis Sustainability Coalition, their email or listserv process where the information just goes out. Ideally, these updates would be H.O.P.E advisory board updates that can go out to any interested party. They would include news reports from news services, new providers that might be coming on the radar, decisions that are made on the topic of homelessness, and that could be decisions coming out of this recommendations from the H.O.P.E advisory board, or it could be municipal decisions, so City of Corvallis, even some of our surrounding Benton County cities, as well as Benton County decisions, ideas of how to get involved, and then of course regional updates as well that aren't just Corvallis centric, or the largest concentration of the homelessness issue does arise in the Corvallis and peripheral areas, but it is certainly not limited to, so including those regional updates from outer areas as well, or more rural areas. Rather than the top-down approach only, we discussed ideas of a quarterly public forum, so opening it up, brief opportunities for H.O.P.E to provide verbal updates, but more importantly to answer community questions about recent updates, provide dialogue and community conversations. An opportunity beyond the 10 minutes that happen in this meeting, just because of the constraints of this group and volunteer time. Those have been limited comment periods. This would be something quite different and really focused on public engagement. And the recommendation is that those would be a minimum of 2-hour sessions. And again, those would be quarterly. And then notification. There have been concerns along the way with last minute things coming up that are related to emergency response, such as when Safe Camp kind of hit the radar unexpectedly, making sure that we have notices going out to neighborhoods that are affected, businesses that are affected, and not just a real localized or targeted area, but a little bit broader, so more of a regional notice system. And that would include any new services, new transitional locations that have been approved or funded by the city or county. The intent of this notice and involvement requirement is to provide ample time and opportunity for community engagement. Organizations funded by the city or county or approved to provide social services or transitional housing must provide routine opportunities for two-way communication and a mechanism to provide feedback for neighbors and nearby businesses. Organizations will forward neighborhood feedbacks to city and county funders to evaluate future funding decisions and encourage resolving issues with neighbors. Community-wide notice should also be provided in the routine monthly community-wide communications. So again, the intent of this really was to focus on that community knowledge, community engagement, a two-way conversation, and that's what we as a work group we're bringing forward.
Thanks, Catherine. Feedback on the transitional options recommendations. There are really three main ones: prioritizing the investment for any kind of transitional living based on public support, with micro shelters being most preferred, the referral pathways for individuals with felony convictions, and the communication notice and community involvement. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. Jan, I saw you raise your hand. Are there other people who want to give feedback?
I just wanted to note how critical it is to have the communication with wherever these places are going to be sited. So for instance, the Safe Camp took, I don't know, over a year to come to terms with what was happening. They have a communication system in place. It's working. It's how you want to be. It is how it got to be successful and integrated within the neighborhood. And that's so critical. And as far as that goes, as far as letting the people know in the community, I think just like the Sustainability Committee has a wonderful website, we could do it with one as well. A dashboard style.
Other feedback for this group? Barbara, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I do see now the point that Joel was making of the overlap and somewhat of a contradiction in what we're saying in terms of the emergency shelter and tent camping, and then also including very similar language into the transition. And I would recommend that we remove the tent camping from the emergency shelter and just and make that inclusionary in the, if that's even a word, in the transitional. Because I think that language that was in the slide that Joel presented said the same thing. I got the same message from it. It's not something the public wants. It's not something we want. We're pretty sure it's not what the people that are experiencing it want. But if it helps us take unmanaged campers and put them into a managed camp that puts them on that spectrum, like Alita said, then that's what we're going to recommend. I'm just trying to think of this in terms of having it be heard at the public level without all of the background that we have had in drafting this language. I think it might be a little confusing. Thank you.
Others who want to chime in?
Well, I'm going to chime in because I really, really don't like tents either. But I've recently visited Safe Camp, and there was actually one tent there in their Safe Camp place because someone didn't want to be in a shelter. But putting that aside, the tent, if we can set aside a place for tents, then we can surely put micro shelters in them instead of tents. That's kind of where I'm coming from.
And if I can just follow on to what Flip said, Flip, I completely agree with you. And if that means that that person who was camping out in the tree farm and, you know, had no access to hygiene is now part of Safe Camp, and, you know, they're not pooping in the woods and having that go into our waterways, then yes, that is definitely an improvement. And then, yeah, the next step is, can we get them into something with a locking door?
Well, thanks, Barbara. I noted that the language is redundant from the emergency portion and the transitional portion. So thank you for that. Any other feedback on this transitional groups? All right. For 30 seconds, can everybody stand up? I'm sorry, Zan, I know you can't stand up right now, but anybody who can, just stand up and move your body. Look away from your screen. Oh, it is pouring rain outside. Take a deep breath. We have one more topic to go on permanent supported housing and your last recommendations. So we're in the home stretch. All right, let's come on back. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again. And moving on to topic 4 on permanent supported housing. I believe I am handing this over to Carol. Carol, are you on the call? I haven't seen your face in a while. There you go.
There I was. I didn't think you were handing this over to me though. But,
oh, am I not handing this part over to you?
I can read it just as well as anybody else. I thought I was doing anyway. Okay, so we're talking about the increasing the development. Oh yes, you are handing this over to me. Acquisitions of affordable housing per units of permanent supportive housing. So one would be to increase the units. We talked a bit about the amount. We decided that 20 was a good time for the next 8 years. We wanted to have a specific target rather than just say, you know, add more permanent supportive housing. So there's some fluidity in that number 20. New construction can be new construction or converted, as we already know. Develop a framework for awarding funds that encourage, incentivize, or requires, when possible, a certain percentage of permanent supportive housing units and housing projects seek affordable housing funding from the city of Corvallis. This could be system development waivers, might be an example of how we would incentivize. There's possibility of taking a portion of the CET tax and using that to incentivize. And we have the county pursue additional funding streams to increase permanent supportive housing units in Greater Benton County to implement this recommendation. The last I read from the report from the county, I think it was Public Works, they didn't seem to have quite the same handle on CET and how that could be used as the city does. I think my recollection is they felt that construction excise tax was really for not for commercial buildings or just for housing. So that needs to be clarified. And then CDG, the CDG,
community development block.
Thank you.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I thought there was something about on the next slide about ADUs. Is that the next one, or is that down the line?
That one is Andrea.
Yeah.
We will pass the mic over to Andrea. Thanks, Carol.
My pleasure.
This slide is all about increasing development or acquisition of affordable housing units for permanent supported housing. Some ideas that we talked about or wanted to recommend are coordinating with city and county community development departments so that they're actively facilitating and encouraging local organizations to apply for funding for these units. A lot of time, or what we were talking about was there needs to be some capacity built for being able to provide permanent supported housing. It's a relatively newer concept, I think, in Oregon, and organizations aren't necessarily super skilled in how to deliver that type of housing, but we certainly have plenty of housing agencies, not just locally, but statewide, who might be interested in providing these kinds of units. So, you know, accessing resources from OHCS, being involved with the efforts that they are going through and supporting the development of more permanent supported housing in the state, and getting technical assistance from places like the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which I actually today am just drafting up a training plan for my staff from those guys. So, collaborating with other cities and other governments in the state to increase, or not other governments in the state, goodness, other in the county to increase permanent supported housing units outside of Corvallis too. It's going to look a little different than it probably would look in Corvallis, however, because not a super popular option outside of Corvallis. And then also city and county will evaluate non-traditional zoning and code solutions to respond to the need for more permanent living options. So figuring out a way of codifying permanent tiny home villages, kind of like Emerald Village or Peace Village. Also, we've kind of started that process already, but continuing to work that out. Accessory dwelling units should be made allowable and more easily achievable. Corvallis allows this already. The county needs to make some code changes in order for this to be allowed. And then also more motels converted to permanent living. And I know of another motel that's for sale if anybody wants to buy it. So do I have the next slide or is that it, Julie?
No, I think that's it, Andrea. Thank you. I put in this Venn diagram just to stress that this recommendation about the need for city and county community development departments working together to be proactive came out of both the work groups on topic 3 and topic 4. So the finalizing of this recommendation is being voiced by topic 4, but there was a lot of overlap from both these topics. So it's important from both those perspectives. Okay, passing it over to Jim for the next 2 slides. Jim, I can't hear you if you're trying to talk.
I was succeeding at talking, but not at making myself heard. All right, so the next 2 slides are going to get into some of the essential components of permanent supportive housing. One of them is the ability to pay rent. So we're talking about permanent supportive housing as a model for helping chronically homeless people with disabilities transition into stable and healthier lives. Homeless people don't have money, and homeless people who are with disabilities, although they may get or can eventually get disability payments like SSI. SSI, I looked it up today, the 2021 payment amount for SSI is $794 a month. Compare that $794 a month in total income for many folks to the fair market rent for an efficiency apartment in Corvallis of $932, or the rent on a one bedroom of $1,031. I would add that fair market rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Corvallis has gone up 56% in the last 5 years. So an essential component of permanent supportive housing is the ability to pay rent, and an essential way to do that is rent assistance, typically through the Section 8 program that the Housing Authority offers. There's a catch though. When you're homeless, if we want to help you get off the streets today, you can't wait the 2 years or more that it may take on a waiting list for a Section 8 housing choice voucher to come through. And so the way to close that gap and helping a homeless person today get housing tomorrow is to attach some Section 8 assistance, the rent subsidy, to the actual housing unit. And because we're talking about permanent supportive housing, we're talking about actual places, actual housing units. And that's not something that the Housing Authority currently does in Benton County. They started doing it in a small way in Lynn County at one of their own projects. But I think it's an important recommendation of ours that we want our elected officials to work with the Housing Authority in getting that resource into Benton County. And I'd really look forward to talking to Janie some more about that, because now we're very fortunate to have someone who's on the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners on the H.O.P.E board. So place-based Section 8 assistance is an essential component of growing our supply of permanent supportive housing. Next. There are other sources of rent subsidy, and some are being developed all the time, or maybe that's too strong a statement. More are being developed. Certainly there's have been for a long time some rent subsidies available through the VA, HUD-VASH vouchers. Accessing those will continue to be important, but also the state of Oregon has made permanent supportive housing one of its top 6 priorities in the state housing plan. And associated with that priority is the appropriation of dollars that the legislature has made towards creating a state-funded rent assistance program. And some of that is being attached, or maybe all of it, is being attached to growing the supply of permanent supportive housing. So that will also be a resource that will be important to grow the supply of permanent supportive housing in our community. And then finally, one of the themes of our recommendations is the matter of equity. And it's going to be important in so many ways that the programs that we're promoting, that the programs that we fund have an equity plan, and that includes permanent supportive housing, and making sure that our supportive service systems and rent assistance programs intersect appropriately with culturally specific organizations in our region that have the ability to best serve communities of people that are disproportionately impacted by homelessness.
Thank you, Jim. Bruce, I think you are doing this slide.
Yes, hello, thank you. So this set of recommendations focuses on behavioral health services and related types of supportive services that are necessary to wrap around permanent supportive housing in order to make the housing solution more likely to be successful long term for the people that are making use of the opportunity. And there's a common thread in these recommendations that points in the direction of sustainable funding for the types of organizations that are providing the services, and points in the direction of moving them away from so-called soft money or less dependable sources of funding, and in the direction of more dependable sources of funding, such as Medicaid reimbursability for case management and related services. So the first sub-recommendation sets a foundation by calling on the county to essentially extend its behavioral health responsibility to the permanent supportive housing unit setting. And then the second sub-recommendation calls for the county to serve as somewhat of an umbrella contractor or a general contractor to provide the infrastructure for non-county staff from, for example, community-based organizations to provide behavioral health support, with the county serving as that reimbursement infrastructure when needed to provide clinical oversight, to programmatic oversight in order to support that reimbursability and essentially, build the infrastructure for sustainable funding. And then the last sub recommendation gets into further collaboration with IHN as the coordinated care organization, Medicaid payer, essentially, OHA's agent for Medicaid reimbursement, as well as Samaritan as a provider organization, in order to ramp up a more robust and sustainable infrastructure for delivering behavioral health services at the permanent supportive housing unit sites.
Thank you, Bruce. Okay, so now is the time for feedback on the topic of permanent supported housing. They have 3 intentions with these recommendations: increase the units, increase rental income options, and increase supportive services. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if any HOPE board members have feedback for their group. Zan.
I just have a quick question. I know that there was a lively conversation ongoing for a while in terms of providing incentives to increase permanent supportive housing options. Jim was having that conversation with folks at the city community development. And so do we want to make specific recommendations about the city creating additional financial incentives to developers to include permanent supportive housing in their developments?
Jim, I think you should probably respond based on your conversations with Paul.
Thank you, Zan. I don't know why that kind of dropped off my radar screen, because that's where we were headed towards that. And I think we weren't done talking to Paul Bellotta, the community development director, about it just yet. But what Zan's talking about is whether the city has dollars that it puts into affordable housing. The question is there a way that the city could incentivize developers to do more permanent supportive housing? And part of the response was that, well, the city is already, and will continue to fund requests that come their way. So if Corvallis Housing First proposed something and it was a good project, the city wouldn't need to prioritize it to give them a big yes. I think the question for me was, sometimes the city gets requests for larger projects that may have no permanent supportive housing units in them. They may get a request for a nonprofit developer doing 50 units. And so the question still remains, is there something the city could do that would incentivize that developer to, say, include five PSH units as part of this larger development? I think we have to talk about that some more. I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Yeah, I think what you ended up including was develop a framework for awarding that encourages, incentivizes, or requires, when possible, a certain percentage of units. Because I think based on Paul's response, there'll be times when they can't require it because it would mean that the project loses out on other funding. So really leaving that to the experts in community development to develop this framework to try to encourage, incentivize, or require when possible. If that answers your question, Zan.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Julie. I forgot that there was some general language in there that didn't get into specifics, but I think for now that's probably just gonna need to suffice.
Jan had her hand up and then Flip.
Yeah, real quick. I know Peggy's not here, but I thought that we had a concern about being fair market rent had to do with the fact that we're part of the rural Oregon communities or rural Oregon County. So our area is Lincoln, Lynn, and Benton, which could put a limitation on what we're able to do.
Are you talking about place-based assistance, Jan? What are you talking about?
I am talking about Section 8.
Jim, did you want to answer?
Yeah, Jan, that was a misunderstanding of how fair market rents are calculated. Fair market rents for Corvallis are calculated on the basis of the Corvallis Metropolitan Statistical Area, which is just Benton County. And it doesn't have anything to do with that areas outside of Benton County.
Flip.
Okay, so I wanted to know, what is the difference between a contractor building a permanent supported house versus an apartment building? What makes that distinctly different? Is it they're smaller?
Maybe Andrea can answer that question.
Or Jim. I saw Jim unmute himself.
Jim, go ahead.
You're the one that actually does it, Andrea. Maybe you should answer.
I know, but I'm pitching it to you because I didn't hear the whole question.
Oh,
the whole question again?
No, what makes permanent supportive housing different is that it has a guaranteed way to pay the rent, and it has wraparound supportive services. The location of the permanent supportive housing can vary. Andrea has property that has, I don't know how many, 19, I'm going to make this up, 19 people living in rooms. Another location might be apartments that are where all the units are permanent supportive housing, or it could be just a few units inside a larger apartment complex. It could be a duplex. The issue isn't the building type so much as whether it's congregate sort of a setting or a scattered site, and whatever type of building is that it works for.
So I think what I hear you saying is that it means that whoever owns it is going to be receiving a reduced amount. Because if you're going to be building houses that are going to be for permanent supported housing, it seems like it'd be really smart to really push making things like at Emerald Village, where you keep the rent low right from the get-go.
Well, so here's the deal. Well, here's the deal with that, Flip. So like, if we can get, so permanent supported housing, so let's say that, we have an apartment complex, we're able to either get a place-based Section 8 vouchers for those apartments, which means that the rent support comes from the federal government and it's attached to that unit, or we're putting people into that apartment complex who either have a voucher or they've applied for a voucher and they need gap funding. So like maybe they need a year or something like that of rent support. But either way, we're able to access Section 8 vouchers to pay for their rent. Inevitably, the rent's going to have to be reasonable enough that it doesn't exceed the amount of the voucher. But as far as like the tiny homes go, in order to access access rent support, you have to comply with HUD regulations on the type of housing it is in order to get the voucher. They're pretty flexible, but there's definitely some guidelines there. But if you don't have a voucher and you just, you have somebody who is on SSI and they, like our rule at our housing is people don't pay more than 30% of their income towards rent. So it's not a fixed amount of rent for the apartment. It's dependent on the income of the person.
Yeah, but I still want to push the idea that creating smaller homes that will simply not generate the high rent is just a good way of using money. It's like a systemic thing that you're creating beautiful little places that will keep so many people from falling through the gaps, and then you eliminate the need for outside expense. So
right.
How do
those houses are not cheap. Like a micro shelter is $15,000. It costs $15,000, and they don't have indoor plumbing. And
I'm not talking micro shelters. I'm talking Emerald Village. And I'm saying that because if we can incentivize builders so that they can build these smaller houses that will be able to meet the needs of people on limited incomes, then we're way ahead because we don't have to keep onward subsidizing it.
Well, and that's part of what this group recommended is the need for more flexibility for something like Emerald Village, for 30 tiny homes on 1.8 acres. So it's included in their recommendation.
And what I would say, Flip, is that it's not an either or question. I think your idea is a good one, and there's a place for it. But it's not instead of other strategies as well. I was in the affordable housing business for my whole career, and I built over 500 units of affordable housing, and that's because there was sources of subsidy that allowed us to build places with below market rents. And so there's multiple strategies for housing people, and I think we should be pursuing all of them.
Okay.
All right, George, you have feedback for this group, and then we do want to move on because we're running out of
Just
time.
to add on a couple of things to what Jim said, I mean, I think that's the part that's hard for people to get their head around is in order to get rents low based on what it costs to actually build something, in order to keep costs low, you have to have large infusions of cash to be able to keep the rents down. That's difficult. Private developers not going to do that. And if we're talking about incentives, particularly cash incentives or any kind of charge waiving incentives, I would say I'd like to see a lot more data about that, because that's part of trying to support a market-based solution to solving the housing problem. And market-based solutions haven't worked in the past. If they did, we wouldn't be having the conversation. People would be building them, and they don't get built because there's not any money in them to build them. It costs too much for that. So we're going to have to talk about public support. So if we're talking about incentives, I'd like to see data that says these are incentives that have worked at other places.
Thanks for that feedback, George. All right. So the last three recommendations from you all really are about how to implement your first 15 policy recommendations. So they have to deal with the need for organizational capacity to work on and implement them, organizational capacity needing to be built within organizations to manage and provide the services, funding recommendations, and legislative advocacy needs. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Reese, I think.
Thanks, Julie. Organizational capacity is needed to work on and implement these recommendations. And organizational capacity needs to be built within social service organizations to manage and provide these services. Paid full-time staff are needed to work on, coordinate, and implement these recommendations on homelessness. Whether that capacity is built internally or contracted out, no new solutions can be successfully implemented without new staff whose job it is to work on the topic of homelessness. The following functions are needed to implement these recommendations: project management, coordination, and outreach, land use planning, grants management, grant writing, contracting, grant administration, oversight, and reporting. Specifically, a team is needed to research and pursue sites for emergency and transitional sheltering, permanent supportive housing, and service locations. The type of work that DLR has done for the Criminal Justice Systems Improvement Project is needed to research sites, zoning, and other parameters to provide site-specific options for providers and city-county leadership to make informed decisions. Thanks.
Thank you, Reese. All right, Zan.
I thought I was on the funding recommendations and not this one.
Oh,
but
are you?
I-
I'm so sorry. Would you like me to do this one?
Go for it.
Okay. This is about investing in building organizational capacity at service organizations that can provide all the components in your recommendations and work to transition people out of homelessness. The best case scenario would be to build capacity by supporting and collaborating with groups who are already here in Benton County and have demonstrated their efforts to provide services. But if no local organizations wish to build and grow organizational capacity in that way, because it's ultimately up to them, having the county and city recruit organizational capacity to Benton County to make sure all these services are provided. And also some suggestions about expanding capacity at existing organizations with already successful models like COI, Corvallis Housing First, and Safe Place by providing more micro shelters or more staffing capacity. And then making sure to note that capacity must be built for organizations to serve Benton County residents outside of Corvallis. And that also speaks to some of the portion of the recommendation on a need for mobile service delivery. This recommendation about the need for staff to work on, coordinate, and implement these recommendations came from every single one of your work groups. So it's needed for all of the recommendations to be implemented. Same goes for that need to build organizational capacity with service providers to support people transitioning out of homelessness. That recommendation came from all of the 4 different topic areas, and that's why it's included and applies to all of your first 15 recommendations. Go for it, Zan.
Thanks, Julie. As you've heard many times already this evening, we are going to have to braid together funding from all kinds of different sources, state, federal, private, tax dollars, to expand organizational capacities to work on these topics and to fund the implementation of the recommendations. It's going to require a lot of partnership work. And we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we don't want to compete with existing service providers for funds that they rely on in order to keep their operations going. One of the core recommendations is that we need additional grant writing capacity, either the city or the county, to bring in net new funds. There are some examples of challenging grant opportunities or funding sources that aren't being fully utilized right now. One is that the county has access to community development block grant dollars that can sometimes be used for housing that we have not been accessing for the last, I would say 6 years or so, because the dollars are difficult to manage and they need a lot of interaction across departments. So this is something that I would very much like to see at the county, is better capacity to take advantage of these dollars that come from the federal government. The other is to have the capacity to further pursue that Medicaid 1115 waiver that you've seen on some of these slides, to provide funding for housing case managers, and to pursue granting sources like the ones through SAMHSA. And I can't remember what SAMHSA stands for, but it is a federal health and services
Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration.
Thank you. To provide for transitional housing for individuals with behavioral health diagnoses that aren't folks that have severe and persistent mental illness. So there are lots of things we could do if we had the capacity at the county to go after those dollars. And additionally, we could also be pursuing things like a different use or an expansion of transient lodging tax funding, or the construction excise tax dollars. But we have to have the capacity again to develop those concepts and put them together for approval by either City Council or the Board of Commissioners. Lastly, we want to be able to tap foundation sources of funds too, but not in competition with our community organizations and service providers. And there are a lot of private dollars that we could potentially access through community foundations like Oregon Community Foundation or Benton Community Foundation, donor advised funds, where if we had a good concept or idea to pitch, we might be able to bring in more funds that are not necessarily an ongoing source. They might be one-time money. So I think that there are new dollars we can bring in. We just have to invest some money in order to bring that money to the table.
Thanks, Anne. Who is doing this slide?
I think Jan is.
Jan, thank you. If you can be brief, we are a little over time.
I will be brief. Okay, I think that one of the things that the city has a legislative committee, they're always looking at what's going on in the legislature. I know the county, every month, they give Dan Rayfield and Sarah Gelser an earful. State and the League of Oregon Cities is very active in lobbying for whatever it takes for cities to thrive and succeed in this kind of a thing. Any partnerships we can get, more power to us. The best way, there's some ideas out there, one of which is, I don't know if it would, I don't want to say if it's a good idea or not for the Pac-12 events, but we do need inventive and creative ways of getting funding, and we need to lobby the legislature and our lawmakers.
And one thing to be sure to note about that first bullet is the lobbying for some statewide leadership on requirements for beds in each county with accompanying state funding on it. Because that is something that came out of a lot of your public feedback and feedback from your subject matter experts.
Yeah, that is quite a sore point, and I know California has that. They legislated that in 2006, I believe.
All right, I'm going to take just a few minutes to do a couple community updates. That Project Turnkey acquisition of the Budget Inn Motel should be opening at the end of this month. So congrats to Andrea and Corvallis Housing First on adding 24 non-congregate units to our emergency sheltering system. Way to go. I see something in the chat. And Andrea's saying, if anyone wants to see it, we have tours. So you can go down and tour it. Hot off the press, the emergency services grant funding coming down from COVID emergency funding will be bringing in $2.6 million over the course of the next year into Benton County to bolster emergency sheltering, outreach to culturally specific groups like our Native American community and our Black community experiencing homelessness. Transitioning people out of homelessness, bolstering our data collection efforts, warming and cooling locations, the daytime drop-in center, the Budget Inn, and the men's shelter. So this is a huge, huge thing for our emergency services and street outreach, and from an equity perspective. The Street Outreach Response Team is going to be coming under the umbrella of the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center. Allison Hobgood has a woman named Maddie Bean who is interning with her from the Masters of Social Work program. And so she's taking on the management or the leadership role for Street Outreach and Response. Did I get that right? I'm seeing something in the chat. Okay, thank you, Andrea. And just an update about the Crisis Resource Center and crisis response work. It is ongoing and it's in the planning phase, and the Willamette Criminal Justice Council has a subcommittee on this topic. Our behavioral health director is also working with Criminal Justice Systems Improvement and WCJC to make sure that there is collaboration, that there's forward progress, and that research on the feasibility of these continues to happen. And I know that that is a high priority for this group. Jan, you stayed at the Budget Inn during your first visit in 1974 to Corvallis.
Yep.
A couple.
I remember the room. Yep.
A couple of next steps. In April, we'll do some community engagement on the final draft. At your next month's meeting, you will finalize phased approaches and timelines and final language for these recommendations. And on May 20th, city and county elected officials will meet for the first time to process your recommendations. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see how y'all are feeling about this at this point. Andrea.
I just want to say one quick thing that it's so exciting. Like the money that we just got is insane. It's like a game changer. So I just wanted to say, go us. 2.6 million over the next year is pretty insane amount of money.
Yes, and one of the group's recommendations about a need for a tribal liaison to do street outreach and case management and connect Native American unhoused community members to their tribes, if that's something they want to do, was funded with this emergency services grant. And so I think, you know, keep it in your recommendation because it needs to be a permanent position. But initial funding for that is off the ground. Jan.
I just wanted to reach out. I'm going to be hopefully sending out a memo with a couple of questions about how to approach the budget that Corvallis is going to be putting together.
Thanks, Jan. And yes, Zan is noting in the chat that it was a team effort. I mean, I hosted some meetings, but really the heavy lifting was Sean Collins, Andrea Myrie, Peggy McGuire, and Allison Hobgood to put together all of that content. And Peggy, she's not here, but let me tell you, she did the heavy lifting and the grant application and will serve as the fiscal agent and do the reporting to really help upgrade our data system here and street outreach and emergency sheltering. Oh, Jan, is your puppy barking at me? All right. Well, hopefully we're clear on what's happening in the next month. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll email out an updated timeline to the whole board so that we're all on the same page. Any final thoughts or questions? Well, thank you so much. Oh, go ahead, Zan.
I just wanted to say once again, I mentioned it by email the other day, but this is a huge body of work, and you all have put hours and hours and hours into this. Thank you. We're getting close.
We are. Thank you all so much, and we will see each other in the next month. Everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all.